Hello, Willowbrook family. Today's daily Devo is found in Acts chapter 6. At Willowbrook, there is a workshop. Inside, you'll find all sorts of tools and saws and drills. In fact, when you see Mike Moss, our facilities manager, do a daily Devo, it usually is shot from the workshop. Another tool that's in the shop is a welder. Sometimes we need to build something out of many different pieces of metal. And oftentimes, when you weld two pieces of metal together, they are actually stronger than if it was just one big piece to begin with. God also uses this same process with his church. Satan is always trying to split apart the church into many pieces so it'll fail. And here in Acts chapter 6, we see his attempt to divide the church. But Satan's plan backfires, and in a really big way. But first, let me give you some background. The original church was growing quickly, and with that growth, they were experiencing growing pains. There were basically two types of Jewish converts at that time. Native Hebrews, those Jews who were more inclined to embrace Jewish culture and were mostly from Judea. Then there were the Hellenistic Jews. They were from different areas of the Roman Empire and were more inclined to embrace Greek culture. For the most part, native Hebrews tended to regard Hellenists as unspiritual compromisers with Greek culture, and Hellenists regard Hebrews as holier-than-thou traditionalists. So from the get-go, they were suspicious of each other. Well, a conflict arose when the Hellenistic Jews believed that the widows among the Hebrew Jews were receiving better care. Now, I don't believe it was intentional. You see, in a congregation that size, sometimes needs can be overlooked, but Satan loves to use an unintentional wrong to begin a conflict. The Hellenistic Jews were right in their hearts, and the Hebrew Jews were right with their facts. And this is perfect conditions for a church to split. Satan was loving it. Fortunately, God gave wisdom to the 12, and they decided to pick 7 men who would head up the ministry with the widows. Now, notice in verse 3, they lay out some very strong spiritual qualifications for these men. Now, you may think, why be so picky? Aren't they just waiting on tables? Well, these men would be doing kingdom work. And you might think that being a greeter or making snacks for VBS is a lesser job and doesn't require as much spiritual commitment as standing in front of the church speaking and leading. But remember, sometimes a person will have some of the greatest impact for the kingdom on a personal one-to-one level than maybe someone that's standing up on a platform. So if you serve, remember that you have tremendous value. And God can use you to change lives, no matter how small of a job it is. The 12 valued these men, for it will free them up for prayer and ministry of the word. Now, notice the order here. First, prayer. Second, ministry of the word. Now, I believe this whole thing is very significant. They made a point to speak to God about men before they spoke to men about God. You see, if you teach in any way, pray that God will move in the hearts of those who will hear you teach before you worry about how much they'll be impressed and moved by your teaching. That is definitely something to chew on. So, God had given the church a solution to prevent a split. It's also interesting to note that the 7 men all had Greek names, and maybe they were Hellenistic Jews themselves. That would also be a smart move. Well, after this had been resolved, Satan did not like what he saw, and he decided to try to discredit the solution by spreading false allegations against Stephen. Now, a group of Jewish men confronted him from the synagogue of the free men. Now, more than likely, this was made up of Jews who had been enslaved by Pompey. Now, after a time, they were freed, and many of them returned to Jerusalem. God had given Stephen such wisdom that these men could not even cope with it. They had no rebuttal against God's truth. This was a classic battle between the flesh and the spirit. And the only way they could battle the spirit in their mind was by telling lies. That's still true today in our own lives. So these men gathered up false witnesses. Satan was encouraged. He would defeat this young church after all. But his plan was about to backfire. Even though the church could break into pieces, as you will see in the coming days, God will use this time of adversity in the church's life to weld the pieces back together and spread God's church out worldwide, stronger than it had ever been. God did that with his church, and he'll do the very same thing with you as well. Have a great day in the Lord, Willowbrook.